Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all our participants on this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think we have a few people that will still be filtering in, but I think for the purposes of time, we can definitely get going and get started on what we hope is a really engaging and interesting overview of what the Next Level Grant Facility has been achieving over the last few years. So I'm Tiffany Chalmers, and I'm a program manager at South South North. And South South North was leading on some of the learning around the NLGF, but in collaboration with the Voices for Just Climate Action Alliance and our fund managers, who you'll hear a bit more from today. So just some housekeeping before we get going. Please ensure that your Zoom tag has your name and organization so that we can call on you if needed, especially our panel. Please make sure that you are on mute when not speaking. It is a webinar, but it does have meeting settings, so please just mute your speaker, otherwise we will mute it for you. And we also have interpretation in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and French, so please use the function at the bottom of the Zoom screen for any interpretation needs. And please let us know in the chat if you are having any issues with interpretation. There is also a Q&A box. If we have time at the end of the meeting, we may use some of the questions directly to the panel, but we do have some specific questions that are aligned to the panel discussion. But we do appreciate your interest, and hopefully we can also get back to some of your Q&A questions after the session. So thanks again. Just in terms of the run of show, so the objectives really of this webinar is to share some of our findings from a report and the implementation of the Next Level Grant Facility. So the Next Level Grant Facility was a specific facility under the Voices for Just Climate Action program, which is a 5-year funded project under the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, mainly led by the organizations that you can see below. And it was really about enhancing and creating civic space through mutual capacity strengthening, through coalition building, as well as sort of changing budgets and policies to allow local finance to reach the local level. So what we're trying to achieve here in the next sort of 2 hours or so is really we want to share that evidence and learning from what the NLGF has been able to achieve. I think there's been a lot of interest in what this program has been able to do and how it's operated within the framework of the ministry's Power of Voices program. And then we would like to just highlight some of the models of how that was really run at the country level. So we'll be hearing from 3 speakers, showcasing 3 case studies from their countries to really give it a good idea of what the NLGF actually was doing across the 3 different continents. And then we'll also be showcasing some of the outcomes from the learning report and surfacing some of the key lessons for specific sort of funders, intermediaries, and policymakers, which can also be found within these 2 publications that we've recently launched. So I'll post a link in the chat, but essentially the NLGF came to a closure in the end of 2025, which is when the Voices for Just Climate Action program came to an end. And we undertook some research with 2 external researchers. I think they're on the call here just to acknowledge them, also Daniel and Olusun Kanmi. And we've produced a learning report as well as a policy brief that really showcases and highlights some of those lessons from the implementation of the Next Level Grant Facility. So we'll be hearing also from my colleague Charlotte Scott, who will speak to some of the findings in that report and also some of the lessons and recommendations that are coming out of there. Great. And with that, I'm going to hand over to the VCA Program Director, Tandiwe Chikomo, who's just going to give us an overview of the Next Level Grant Facility before we go into some of the details of actually what it was able to achieve. So Tandiwe, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Tiff. And it's really nice to see everyone around the table. I hope you are all doing very well. It's really a great opportunity to be able to come to this event to celebrate this celebratory event, which will highlight the lessons learned from implementing the Next Level Grant Facility. But where did we start from? How did the VCA come about introducing the next level grant facility? Well, there are a number of factors that led the VCA to setting up this small grants program in the 3 regions and, of course, in the 7 implementing countries. In the first instance, I think all of us do acknowledge that climate change continues unabated, and this has resulted in long-term socio-economic challenges, especially for those that are in the global south. Climate change is fundamentally a crisis of power asymmetries, where those least responsible for greenhouse gas emissions suffer the harshest consequences. This structural imbalance dictates who gets protected, who pays the cost, and who controls the transition to a greener future. Of course, this was further compounded by shrinking civic space. I think we saw in a number of countries where we are implementing VCA, deliberate attacks against the very existence of civil society and its representatives. As efforts to redress the situation were being made, it was obvious that there were significant inconsistencies. For example, a majority of traditional funds designed to combat the climate crisis further entrenched inequalities, rarely reaching the vulnerable communities in the global south. And the small groups that are largely in the countries where we are implementing VCA were simply invisible, and some of them could not operate openly for security reasons, let alone showing a track record for what they have done. And because of their small size, these grassroots groups could not meet the bureaucratic requirements set by major international funds, donors, and financial institutions. At the backdrop of this was the Alliance's underlying principle of Southern leadership and local ownership. There was recognition within the Alliance that building societal support for climate action and addressing existing power structures require the empowerment of citizens, especially marginalized groups and those who feel the impact of the climate crisis every day. So beyond the selection of the trusted partners who would hit the ground running, the Alliance also purposed to include new, relevant, but less experienced civil society actors to become part of the coalition and part of the program. And of course, this could only be realized or achieved only through the next level grant facility. So in our vision, Southern civil society organizations or these small groups that are involved in the next level grant facility have the legitimacy and power to define climate priorities and solutions. Again, our major guiding principle was to maximize the budget to actual results on the ground that directly benefit people and nature. And this could also be scaled through the next level grant facility. For that reason, the Alliance facilitated structured funding to enhance collaborative decision-making and ownership. For VCA, this meant transfer of budgets, responsibility, and accountability to local partners or civil society coalitions. What did we hope to achieve? In the first instance, we wanted to avoid an anything goes approach. The Alliance, for that reason, the Alliance collaboratively designed a guiding strategic framework with an understanding that the grant was meant to contribute to the VCA's strategic objectives and address emergencies, unforeseen activities, or newly arisen opportunities contributing to the VCA theory of change. We specifically had specific groups in mind, so our targeting was mainly focused on the youth, women, rural, urban, and indigenous groups. So those were our actually priorities. And of course, we were targeting small informal organizations that did not have capacity to apply. We were also looking at groups and individuals, specifically the hard to reach youth and informal youth groups, including young women and individual climate actors. Last but not least, we were also looking at environmental defenders and also local climate champions who may not be able to act on their own or on behalf of a formal organizations. And of course, we were looking at the vulnerable communities who continue to face climate change impacts such as drought and other climate change impacts. So in the first instance, we were looking at funding emergent opportunities and also the rapid response to crisis, and especially the fact that we will be in a position to grant within as little as 48 hours to handle climate disasters, pollution cleanups, and so forth. of course, we had to make some choices when we started VCA, but specifically the next level grant facility, because the grants were relatively going to be small in size and the recipients were limited in administrative capacity, as well as potentially responding to any emergency. The administrative burdens and oversight and monitoring was intentionally meant to be kept to a minimum. Secondly, we actually made a choice in the sense of the governance of the NLGF. A major requirement to the grants facility was that it would be flexible and additional to country programs in order to respond to the emerging situations, especially the threats and the opportunities. And also, of course, we looked at the fact that these grants will differ in size from small to medium, and that the management of these grants would have to be as close as possible to the local setting to reduce management costs and enhance ownership. This is why the role of the fund managers was really imperative to really move the dices here to make sure that the next level grant facility was operational. So what was the significance? What is the significance of this NLGF? In the first instance, as I've already mentioned, the issue of power asymmetries was intentionally an issue that we also wanted to address within the broader framework of the VCA. So we specifically looked at actively shifting decision-making power away from the traditional bureaucratic funding models and place it directly into the hands of the marginalized frontline communities. And how were we going to do this? First of all, bottom-up priority setting, emphasizing our principle of local ownership, making sure that rather than top-down mandates, local communities and grassroots communities would identify their own needs, define climate priorities, and design solutions. Secondly, inclusive governance. The facility actively included demographics that were traditionally excluded, such as the youth, women, and indigenous populations, giving them direct oversight and control over resource allocation. Bridging funding gaps. Traditional climate finance often overlooks local groups due to the strict compliance or security requirements. So in this case, the next level grant facility was meant to remove any hurdles to provide rapid response funding to the people most vulnerable to the climate crisis. Empowering local actors is an obvious factor that we wanted to achieve. And last but not least, we were also looking at the diverse applications, meaning that rather than just piloting, rather than just acting as pilot projects, the funds were actively used for disaster preparedness, nature-based climate solutions, sustainable food and water security, and legal protections for environmental defenders. Climate resilience is an obvious aspect from these different dimensions that I've mentioned. Of course, influencing policy and making sure that we build the capacity of the local communities as the frontline communities to have a voice at regional and international level. And of course, promoting accountability, because the next level grant facility was meant to be a participatory model that helped to build trust and transparency, addressing the accountability gaps often found in traditional top-down climate financing. So with that, I would like to stop here. And I believe that, as we have said, Tiff, I believe that we have already achieved some of these things that we intended at the start of the program in 2021. So I would like to hand over to you so that we can actually hear from those people that have really been in the front lines, championing the next level grant facility and making a difference for the smaller groups in the different 7 implementing countries. Thank you. Over to you, Tiff.
Thank you, Tandiwe. I'm going to hand over swiftly to my colleague Charlotte, who's going to take us through some of the sort of high-level figures and overview of what the next level grant facility was able to actually achieve. So Charlotte, over to you.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Tiff, and thanks very much, Tandiwe, for introducing and setting the scene for the NLGF. I'm going to take us through a very quick snapshot of what you can expect to see in the NLGF learning reports. If you do delve into them, you'll see much richer detail and reflections, but this will give you a snapshot of what's in there before we hear from some of the fund managers in some of the countries where NLGF was operational. As Tandy said, there was this objective for the NLGF to demonstrate that reaching frontline grassroots communities was possible and effective for climate action. And we also had a very participatory and locally led philosophy in implementing that approach. So each of the 7 countries in which NLGF was operating had the freedom to design how the facility looked in that context, what it would prioritize as key areas and ways of working, how it would integrate locally led decision making and participatory approaches. And I think that is part of the value of NLGF, is that in each country, it ended up looking and operating slightly differently, but with similar objectives and the same vision. And some of the themes of the work that came out, I think that was common across many, were addressing things like water access, food security, ecosystem restoration. There was a key focus on defender protection and human rights defenders in some regions, and women and youth leadership and local governance. So to give you a sense of NLGF figures at a glance, at its total, it was sitting around 3.37 million euros, and of that, about 2.43 million was actually dispersed as grants at the local level. So that ended up being around 72% of the total value of the facility across 7 countries, and split into roughly 648 total grants. To give you a sense of kind of the high-level figures and outcomes, we relied, of course, on each fund manager. So each country had a distinct fund manager who had experience in that context, who worked with the VCA regional team in that region and networks of civil society and local actors. And we relied on their reporting, financial reporting and qualitative reporting, but we also supplemented that, as Tiffany mentioned, with a research project that collected data from recipients and the fund managers themselves. So that evidence base, what that looks like is essentially, we had a survey that was both quantitative and qualitative, that we received responses from 192 of grantees across the 7 countries. But answering an online form is, we acknowledge, a barrier for several of the grant recipients. So we supplemented that with in-person interviews in which we had partners able to travel and conduct those. And those were about 62 in total. And then interviews with the fund managers and surveys from the fund managers themselves. And you'll see, I guess we didn't mention this before, but the 7 countries in which NLGF was operating were the VCA countries, which was Tunisia, Kenya, Zambia, Indonesia, Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay, and some very different contexts, which I think required that high level of contextualization in each. So the range of averages of what size the grants were ranged anywhere from 2,000 to just over 9,000 euros. Certainly there were grants that were much smaller than that, in the sort of a few €100 range, but that was the average across in each country, across each country. And those were split very often into 2 broad categories of emergency grants or resilience or opportunity grants. The emergency, defining those 2 categories was also done locally. So what was defined as an emergency did differ across contexts, but generally had a level of urgency, a faster disbursement. So aiming to disperse grants within 48 to 72 hours, and often a shorter duration, but wasn't only limited to immediate crisis or immediate disaster events. It could also be slower onset crises that were nonetheless urgent and amounted to an emergency intervention being needed. But you'll see the majority of grants did go to resilience or opportunity grants, and those were around 3 to 9 months in duration. So quite a short duration for those as well, but longer than some of the emergency grants. We collated across grantees estimates on beneficiaries / individuals reached, and the total number of those sort of aggregate estimates although it is quite a broad estimate, is sitting at around 2.46 million individuals either benefiting or being reached by NLGF grants, and around 56,700 households or 1,455 communities. Interestingly, from the survey material, we asked grantees to rate the impact of their project, and 76% rated it as high or significant. 76% also responded that as a result of the grant, they had formed new partnerships or new alliances, and a significant amount, around 28% of those grantees also reported securing additional funding that would outlive the duration of the NLGF grant. So to spotlight some of the key outcomes, there's sort of a few key categories. I think we can say from the data that NLGF did widen access. It reached grassroots groups, informal organizations and communities, individuals, and many, many first-time recipients who had never accessed grants of this nature before. I think it does show that flexible finance, the way in which it was implemented based on trust, being locally embedded, that improved delivery and allowed for effective grants on the ground. We can see some evidence as well of the catalytic effect of even small grants for a relatively short period of time, showing some impact around sort of catalytic effect, whether that was follow-on funding being secured, new alliances, or institutional capability strengthening, as well as policy and sort of longer-term influence demonstrated. And then another of the key outcomes was around speed, being able to disperse funds quickly so that there could be rapid response to urgent needs on the ground, whether it was floods, droughts, threats to livelihoods, and safety in that category. Of all of the surveyed grant recipients, 95% reported having seen some level of community level change, and those were categorized into several sort of types of changes, themes. And so some of the most common were around climate awareness, ecosystem restoration, or behavioral change. But we also saw a significant number of grants seeing changes around food security, flood preparedness, local governance, and women and youth participation. Grantees also reported challenges. 71% of respondents said they experienced at least one challenge, and the most common challenge was around delayed disbursement. Many of the countries faced really challenging contexts in which to disperse small grants direct to grassroots communities. As Thandiwe had highlighted, there were many challenges to navigate those environments. But when grantees were also asked about what might be some of the practical refinements to the model, most of those were tweaks, small changes that could be refined, and really endorse that the model as a whole does work. So thinking about one of the key outcomes of NLGF, which is around accessibility and how that was designed for, I think we can see that NLGF was able to reach really small, informal, and often first-time grantees that conventional climate finance systems we know do routinely miss. And across the countries, interestingly, there were often common interventions that enabled this. Oh, I think there's participant who needs to mute. Yeah, so local language was incredibly important in all of the contexts, and using simplified templates as part of the application process. Many of the fund managers relied on WhatsApp channels and included avenues for email as well as voice submissions, voice note submissions, phone call, or even video-based proposals. In several contexts, applicants relied on fiscal sponsorship where they
visual ma.
I think someone just needs to mute. Oh, thank you. Yes, and so a fiscal sponsorship was really key for informal associations where the legal environment wouldn't allow disbursement straight to an individual or an informal association. The use of fiscal sponsorship through another organization was another key mechanism that enabled accessibility. From the survey, we can see that 70 to 85% in each of the contexts rated the process as clear and accessible, which is also a great indicator that it was accessible. But 53% on average said that they had received some form of application support. And I think together this really does give this message that fund managers were providing a lot of accompaniment, a lot of support, and that was a key feature that allowed the NLGF to be as accessible as it was. And we've highlighted this as well, as that fund managers absorbed around 23% of the total facility value in direct and indirect costs. And a lot of that was crucial to enable that kind of accompaniment and the support that was needed for many of the grantees to be able to navigate and access finance for the first time. Some of the catalytic effects to spotlight is that, as we said, there were many of the grants resulted in new alliances or partnerships. A significant portion were able to secure follow-on funding, but there was also this element of policy influence. So we saw some initiatives in Indonesia and Paraguay where grants were able to influence input into municipal development plans. And in Brazil, seeing some grants informing local resilience hubs, which shows that I think even for a small, relatively short duration grant, it could have this catalytic knock-on effect and this lasting impact. So we also saw some impact varying. So in Tunisia, there was a much higher level of follow-on funding secured. And in Kenya, there was a really high level of alliance formation, but we were seeing this impact across all of the regions. And in terms of both the follow-on funding and the alliance partnerships, some of the key actors involved would have been local government very often, NGOs, sometimes academia, and also community networks locally. Great. So then the report will delve into in a little bit more depth what were some of the key lessons that could be taken forward from the NLGF for climate finance reform. Definitely one is around it's crucial to simplify access and to reduce friction to enable wider participation, particularly for first-time grantees. And that in order to do this, we need fund flexibility and accompaniment. And those are really important for also having mentoring, translation, and proportionate reporting. I think it was a key lesson to allow the flexibility to interpret key terms like emergencies contextually and allow that flexibility. But other key lessons were around investing in MEL and capability strengthening, including having user-friendly and proportional MEL systems that aren't a burden to local actors, and that those efforts are really resourced appropriately with budget available for them. And finally, kind of reflections on measuring what matters. We can see from the data that the story isn't only just about how much finance was dispersed to the local level, but also about who was able to access it, what changes could be seen locally, and really whether there was a catalytic effect or local capability or voice increasing. So finally, I'll say, I think we end the report by outlining how NLGF, alongside many other mechanisms, can present a kind of blueprint for how this kind of finance can be delivered. I think it's significant that across the 7 countries, there were very different contexts, but NLGF was a success in each of them. It's not only doable in certain contexts, it can be adapted to many different contexts. And there are some core principles that allow that to be possible, which is trust-based relationships, having simplified processes, having local leadership integrated into the decision-making infrastructure. And those are key ways in which we can take forward recommendations for future climate finance infrastructure. If you delve into the reports, you'll also see some some actions for specific actors, for donors, for local institutions, and for fund managers themselves. I think donors are a big audience for these messages, in saying that essentially mechanisms like the NLGF do work and should be funded, and that in order to enable them to do the amazing work that they can do, we need to design access pathways that really are accessible to small actors and include the flexibility that's needed. Something that NLGF didn't necessarily have the scope to enable was more multi-cycle support, and that was something that could be taken forward in future donor programming. For local institutions, I think some key messages from NLGF are around seeing community-led mechanisms as really part of finance delivery systems for climate action, not just a space that pilots happen, but actually as recognizing those even informal actors as legitimate resilience partners that are here to stay and here to deliver really effective climate action. For fund managers, I think it's about protecting what is working and why it works, protecting the relational features of models like the NLGF, including trust, accompaniment, and flexibility as core design elements, and seeing those not just as a cost, but as key to making the model work. So I will stop there. Please do check out both the report and our policy brief for more details. Thank you. And then I will hand back to you, Tiffany.
Great. Thanks so much, Charlotte. I think it's great to get that overview and to get a good sense of what the numbers sort of look like holistically across the different countries. But now we're going to hear from 3 of our fund managers. We're going to hear from Indonesia, Kenya, and Bolivia, just to ground some of those numbers and understand actually what are some of the examples and contexts that the Next Level Grant Facility was operating in. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Nurul from Samdana Institute, Indonesia.
Thank you, Tiffany. And good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone. I believe we all in the different continent. So thank you. Today I'm very honored. Thank you, everyone, to inviting me to share about the journey of Next Level Grant Facility or NLGF in Indonesia. The title of Shifting the Flow is exactly what we are doing now, redirecting the pathway of global climate finance so that the resources don't just settle at the top tier institutional level, but stream directly to the frontline actor who are creating actual survival strategy by daily. So let us examine why this fundamental structure shift is not just preferred, but absolutely critical of our collective climate futures. Next, Charlotte. Okay, so as an archipelagic nation with 1,000 of island, Indonesia fragmented mirrors our climate vulnerability. Frontline community across remote territory are currently absorbing immediate high-intensity climate disruption, and they're also enduring multi-month drought, rapid coastal sea level rise, and volatile, unpredictable weather patterns that directly threaten their primary food system and also their traditional livelihood. When a drought decimates an entire harvest or a storm surge destroy coastal infrastructure, this community cannot afford to wait for national macro budgets to slowly cycle through centralized channels. So the urgent local reality demand a rapid, direct, and agile emergency-style funding flow capable of addressing immediate survival alongside long-term ecological adaptation. Next. Next. From the context of the institutional funding gap, despite the high-level global declaration of locally led adaptation, standard of climate financing remain trapped in the profound paradox. The mainstream international and national funding architecture are heavily centralized. They feature massive access barriers, explicitly require formal registration, multi-year audited financial history, complex digital literacy, and written reporting frameworks. These rigid standards completely exclude informal grassroots groups, indigenous networks, and also remote island population. They're very actor closest to the landscape who hold the generational contextual knowledge required to design effective adaptations. Centralized decision-making process create a state of remote exclusion for those on the front line of the climate change. The NLGF was engineered to solve this exact bottleneck, absorbing institutional compliance requirement at our level so that the direct funding could finally bridge this gap. Okay, next. With NLGF, the model design, we provide a unique structures like how this NLGF changed the dynamic. Then we implemented an intentionally adaptive design built on our 4 innovative pillars here. The first, we explicitly recognize that local adaptation often start with a single dedicated individual. Therefore, we fund single champions alongside the grassroots groups, valuing visionary leader as a vital community catalyst. The second one, we also ensure the agile access by delivering micro grants directly to these actors, ranging flexibility around 2,500 euro to up to 10,000 euros, eliminating the prolonged administrative lag. The third, we deploy also fiscal sponsorship as an administrative and a legal shield, allowing unregistered or informal community groups to receive and manage funds safely while building up their local governance. And the last one, we completely devolve our selection process to localize peer panels. Lived experience and traditional knowledge replace abstract, urban checkbox, ensuring that every single project chosen is culturally fit, ecologically sound, and generally community owned from day one. Next. We see that the key success of enabler from the implementation of the NLGF is the first, we call that the change of trust. We shift our entire operational paradigm away from the paper-heavy transactional due diligence and instead building accountability through pre-existing and deeply rooted social capital networks. This enables us to successfully fund highly vulnerable, historical invisible groups, such as indigenous youth and also marginalized women farmers and fishers. The second, we also enable our commitment to living grants when we recognize that the rigid, immutable budget is a liability in a climate emergency. Our mechanism permit total flexibility, allowing community to dynamically adjust their budget and activity in the real time as a weather condition and local reality is safe. And finally, by embedding peer governance, we secure profound local ownership, making the community the true author of and guardian of their own ecological safety. Next. Okay, so an honest assessment of direct local financing require looking at our operational complexities. Our first key consideration is about the project durations. The project of 12 to 18 months standard process is significant challenge to anchoring permanent ecological restoration and multi-generation adaptation outcomes. Tree and marine ecosystem do not mature on the standard grant timeline. And the second one, we continuously balance the tension between rigid donors, compliance, and also the grassroots administrative capacity, a balance that requires significant intermediary translation support. The third one is learning from the geographic of Indonesia, where the NLGF in Indonesia reaching across 18 provinces naturally increase the cost of monitoring and remote assistance. And lastly, navigating the shrinkage of civic space require our facility to actively maintain an administrative shield to ensure our environmental defender can safely carry out their climate resilient works in the sensitive zones. Next. Here is some slide of impact from the grassroots implementation outcomes of the NLGF in Indonesia. The true measure of NLGF model is found in the physical asset now controlled by the frontline communities. In the drought-prone landscape in East Nusa Tenggara, for example, Indonesia, the women-led group successfully revived climate resilience through sorghum crops, replacing water-intensive rice model that consistently fail, thereby securing absolute local food sovereignty. In vulnerable coastal zone, fisher networks established autonomous mangrove cooperative and coral restoration sites, creating immediate ecological barriers that were so visibly successful they attacked long-term domestic state co-financings. And in our upland ecosystem, indigenous youth group map and secure customary land territories, restoring degraded watershed through traditional agroforestry. And in remote off-grid area, village achieve clean energy microwinds by deploying localized solar microgrids, immediately reducing dependence on biomass and establishing self-managed resilient community infrastructures. Next. Okay, so when we synthesize this piece of the NLGF overarching value proposition become undeniable clear, we act as an institutional translator and protective intermediary. We absorb the complex compliance and auditing pressures demanded by the international climate funds on one end, and transform those resources into small, fast, flexible capital flows that match the informal, adaptive reality of grassroots actors on the others. We are the last mile through social capital, enable dynamic resource adaptation through living grant, deploy live experience to govern fund placement, and fund localized proof of concept that effectively unlock domestic public financings. The NLGF model proved that the local community lack neither the capability nor the financial mechanism that trust them. Okay, next. Okay, next. This is our website. If you want to get into more about what Samdana works, you can easily find scan this. And lastly, the empowering of frontline of the climate action, NLGF is building a decentralized, deeply anchored ecosystem of resilience across Indonesia. We thank to our partners, our peer panels, and most importantly, the grassroots champions who are leading this transition on the grounds. Thank you very much, and I welcome for your question, reflection, and insight that we look to scale them is more globally. Terima kasih. Thank you, Tiffany. Given back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nurul. Appreciate you presenting, especially as always, so late at night. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Tabitha Wakesho to give us their reflections from the context of Kenya and Shack Dwellers International.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. My name is Tabitha Wakesho, and I'm here representing SDI Kenya, affiliated with Slum Dwellers International. And I will take us through the context from the Kenyan perspective. And I think my colleagues have really laid ground on what NLGF was about. So I would just go straight into how all that looked like in Kenya. The next slide, please. So given the, sorry, I think you went further front. So given the climate, given the climate issues that are affecting the underserved communities, including the informal settlement dwellers who SDI Kenya work with, and other rural and underserved communities, they face major problems of flooding, heat, prolonged droughts, and all that. And you'll find that the local groups are at the front line of addressing all these climate adversities in their own solutions. And the thing is that these groups that are addressing these climate adversities in their own way don't have access to financing. And this is because maybe for their limitation for not being like formally registered, they may not have the bank accounts, they may not have the audited statements as all traditional donors may want to access funding. And I think that's the biggest gap that NLGF came to fill in terms of financing. And looking at all these groups and the solutions that they're already doing in the ground, and how you're able to kind of supplement them with resources to continue or further work on their climate actions. And this also include categories of groups that we'll refer to as high-risk groups, including reformed gang members who are in a way trying to address climate change by doing rehabilitation projects in their settlements. So using that basis alone, NLGF provided a platform where applications were received in both English and Kiswahili, and we had a very short application form. We also accepted video applications. And that's also applied to reporting, where we also accepted the low-tech submission, photos, audios, videos, what really changed by getting the support that the groups got. And this was also key in reaching both the registered groups and unregistered groups that are working on climate action. And I think it is very important to say that the short turnaround period was also key, because climate emergencies, they keep coming up and they keep changing. So I think time is of importance, and that you're able to meet the community at their really point of need. The next slide, please. So from the kind of initiatives that we undertook here in Kenya, they range from various thematic areas, including groups that were looking at issues of water and sanitation access, groups that are doing ecosystem restoration, doing river rehabilitation, working on land reclamation, mangrove restoration, and permaculture. We also had groups, especially in the urban setups, who are doing urban waste recycling and the whole environmental cleanup initiatives. And we had groups doing food security, including urban farming, and other kinds of food production. We also had other groups that were doing things related to using clean energy, that is the cooking, energy-saving cooking stoves, and some also were doing solar. So what really enabled NLGF work in Kenya is the simplicity and accessibility of the mechanism, and that at the end, at some time we reflected and so that we should go back to the not well written proposals and using the network of local civil society organizations that are present in the various parts of the country, see areas of capacity strengthening for these groups so that they're able to kind of access these funds. And I think mentioned about the flexibility and rapid response and turnaround. And I also think working in the consortium setting that was set up in the beginning for the whole VCA program really enabled reaching these many groups that were able to reach in NLGF. So we worked with a network of both the alliance and the local partners. The next slide. So these are just some pictures of some of the initiatives that we undertook, but maybe you can go to the next slide. So how then are we going to move from NLGF into other finance mechanisms that are able to support these grassroots groups? First, I think the short turnaround periods let the groups and the communities really act fast on the shocks as they happen and when they happen, and not months later. I think the other thing is strong ownership, and this was really key for us because we supported initiatives that already were being undertaken by some of these groups, and it was just taking their initiatives to the next level, literally in the meaning. And this was enable also an aspect of sustainability of some of these initiatives as they will continue doing these initiatives even after the funding of NLGF comes to an end. And I think the other thing is the issue of removing barriers, all these complex barriers, so that we are able to reach as many groups as we can possibly reach. Looking roughly at before even the onset of the VCA, we had mapped over 500 groups in the Kenyan context, in the urban areas, groups that are already working on climate action in their own, maybe not small or a different way, and looking at the kind of financing that is required for these solutions to actually grow and kind of demonstrate that these solutions are working, I think require removing all these barriers and trying to be flexible and work on trust with the partners in their projects. I think that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening in. I'll take it back to you, Tiffany.
Great. Thank you so much, Wakesho, for those really interesting insights and also giving us some specific examples of what the NLGF was able to achieve, but also some of the focus interventions that took place in Kenya. I'm going to hand over to now our last case study presenter from Bolivia. So Juan Carlos Alarcon Reyes from Comuna Institute is going to present from that context. And then we'll have a panel discussion with some of our fund managers after that around some of the other reflections from the other countries. Juan Carlos?
Muy buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches. Un gusto, soy Juan Carlos, de la Comunidad en Acción y también parte de la plataforma boliviana frente al cambio climático. Bueno, nosotros específicamente vamos a compartir una iniciativa que nos parece muy importante, que es en la región del Pantanal, que se llama la Fábrica del Agua, se queda sin agua, ¿no? Entonces, siguiente, por favor. Siguiente.
Next,
Sorry, Juan
Tiffany.
Carlos, just a minor tech issue. There we go. Sorry about that.
No, no se preocupe, muchas gracias. Bueno, bueno, nosotros como parte de la implementación de estos de fondos de oportunidades y emergencias, hemos desarrollado en dos convocatorias y justamente, digamos, se ha enmarcado también en nuestra agenda, ¿no? Respondiendo también al contexto como respuestas sostenibles e inclusivas a la crisis climática, sobre todo, digamos, apoyando para visibilizar también y reconocer las estrategias o alternativas que las comunidades, territorios ya venían desarrollando y el fondo ha sido justamente para fortalecer, para amplificar estas acciones que venían desarrollando o en otros casos que han tomado como oportunidad. En las dos convocatorias hemos apoyado a 32 iniciativas eh, divididas en dos, ¿no? Que son el fondo de oportunidades, que era sobre todo para dar oportunidad, y el de emergencia es de respuesta inmediata a acciones, sobre todo generadas por los impactos del cambio climático. Siguiente, por favor. Bueno, como decía, de estos 32 iniciativas, me gustaría específicamente compartir una que nos parece muy importante. No quiere decir que las otras no lo sean, sino que creo que es muy importante, digamos, en el sentido, sobre todo, este caso ha sido para generación de evidencia, ¿no? Es decir, mostrar la situación de la crisis climática a la sociedad civil, ¿no? Pero también a los tomadores de decisión. Y este caso se ha desarrollado en el Pantanal. El Pantanal es una región muy importante que está entre Bolivia, Brasil y Paraguay. Tiene una extensión ahí comparativamente, podemos decir, como el tamaño de Bélgica, ¿no? Es decir, estamos hablando entonces de de un sitio Ramsar bastante grande, eh, y que tiene una importancia, digamos, eh, por lo que tiene bastante biodiversidad. Ahí pueden ver ustedes, concentra 2.000 especies de plantas, es, hay 868 especies de animales, ¿no? Es también uno de las regiones donde está el jaguar o el tigre, digamos, que también está amenazado en especie en línea roja, ¿no? Pero además, esta región vive en dos pueblos indígenas, que son los chiquitanos y los ayoreos, y además existen también dos áreas protegidas, ¿no? El Utuquis y San Matías, además de ser un sitio Ramsar con categoría, digamos, de una norma internacional. Como les decía, su importancia tiene que ver, y el título que se puso también es que es un ecosistema que genera humedad, por tanto también es como que la bombea agua para generar la lluvia, ¿no? Entonces, pero además en épocas secas, además lo va haciendo de poco a poco. Pero también es una región que está teniendo fuertes amenazas, y esto creo que también podemos amplificar no solo para esa región, sino creo a todo el territorio boliviano, el tema de la deforestación, ¿no? Es decir, Bolivia somos el bicampeón en la deforestación, es decir, es el país que más deforestación anual tiene en los últimos años, ¿no? Pero también somos el país que más hectáreas de bosque se han quemado, ¿no? Estamos hablando del 2024, por ejemplo, se han quemado como 12 millones de hectáreas, entre de las cuales 1,5 millones han sido bosque primario, ¿no? Y los demás han sido pastizales o bosques secundarios. Por eso también es una región que está amenazada por la ampliación de la frontera agrícola. Esto creo que es muy importante decir. El monocultivo de la soya es una amenaza que va viniendo en toda la región, es decir, desde Paraguay, Brasil, Argentina, Bolivia y va avanzando hacia el norte y principalmente está afectando a la Amazonía, ¿no? Entonces el Pantanal se encuentra entre la Chiquitanía y el inicio de la Amazonía, ¿no? Es una ecorregión que está ahí en el intermedio. Pero también hay amenazas de construcción de hidroeléctricas. Siguiente, por favor. Siguiente. Bueno, entonces, en ese contexto, esta iniciativa, como les decía, que es un fondo de oportunidad, principalmente era para generar evidencia, ¿no? Entonces, era para generar, ¿para qué se generaría evidencia? Era para generar conciencia, sobre todo en los tomadores de decisión, pero también en los habitantes de la región, sobre la importancia de esta ecorregión, ¿no? Pero eso en términos de generación de agua dulce, pero también, digamos, con la información llegar a tomadores de decisión, ¿no? Para que se pueda preservar, conservar y tener políticas ahí para el Pantanal. Siguiente, por favor. Entonces, aquí hay dos fotos que creo que les pueden mostrar claramente del impacto del que estamos hablando. Ahí ustedes tienen, dentro del Pantanal hay una laguna, Laguna Cáceres. Tiene una foto del 2015. Fíjense cómo está el agua, está ahí unas lanchitas o barquitos ahí que pueden verlo. ¿No? Y tienen la foto al otro lado, que del 2024, es realmente cómo el agua se ha secado. Y esto es fruto del impacto de la crisis climática, pero también de las amenazas que les he mencionado hace rato. Entonces, eh, esto es, digamos, lo que está pasando. Esto es un ejemplo, digamos, puntual, pero refleja también otros ejemplos en Bolivia y en parte, digamos, también el fondo ha contribuido para mostrar eso, lo que realmente está pasando, ¿no? Siguiente, por favor. Siguiente. Sí, entonces, ¿qué se ha hecho con esta iniciativa? Principalmente se ha sacado evidencias haciendo entrevistas, ¿no? A expertos, a autoridades, a funcionarios, ¿no? De los parques, y también se ha recorrido todo el área, digamos, de esta región, justamente para tener material para mostrar, ¿no? Siguiente, por favor. Bueno, hay también algunas fotos que muestran aquello que se ha hecho. Ahí ustedes van a ver también cómo en algunas de las fotos ahí en un venado, ¿no? Pero en el río que casi está seco, que es también el río que alimenta o que alimentaba a la laguna, ¿no? Siguiente, por favor. Principalmente, digamos, esta iniciativa ha generado productos comunicacionales, ¿no? Para mostrar por diferentes eh, medios de comunicación, pero principalmente por redes sociales. Entonces, ahí ustedes pueden ver también cómo se ha mostrado para hacer la concientización. Siguiente, por. Bueno, entonces, ahí entre los resultados que podemos mencionar es que en el propio lugar o con las autoridades del territorio es que se ha incrementado el conocimiento, ¿no? Sobre la importancia del Pantanal, ¿no? Que creo que también puede ser un aumento significativo del turismo, ¿no? Y el involucramiento de comunidades para la conservación, exigencia de conservación también. Ya en términos de medio ambiente también hay una sensibilización, ¿no? Entonces, se han generado también acciones, hay un potencial, digamos, disminución de actividades extractivas, ¿no? Las propias comunidades han empezado a tener control sobre esta región, ¿no? Entonces, realmente ha generado conciencia local, pero también a nivel nacional, es decir, a partir de esta iniciativa, muchos ciudadanos bolivianos han conocido que existe el Pantanal, ¿no? Porque no siempre se conoce todo el territorio y la importancia que tiene, no solo para la región, sino también para todo el país, ¿no? Siguiente, por favor. Entonces, como les decía, que principalmente se ha usado las redes sociales, entonces han hecho publicaciones en Facebook, ahí se han llegado a más de 1 millón de personas, ¿no? Han generado interacciones, reproducciones de videos. Si se fija ahí también ha estado presente en varios medios de comunicación, sobre todo televisión, periódico, y también, digamos, esta iniciativa después ha logrado el primer premio, es decir, el primer lugar del Premio Nacional de Periodismo sobre Medio Ambiente, ¿no? Justamente esta iniciativa ha tenido, por eso también ha tenido un impacto nacional, ¿no? Siguiente, por favor. Creo que es eso, pero quería un minuto aprovechar diciendo que, bueno, les quería compartir así puntualmente una iniciativa bien específica y su impacto, pero creo que también todas las iniciativas han sido muy importantes en términos primero de fortalecer a las propias comunidades. Estoy de acuerdo también en que este fondo, ¿no? Realmente ha llegado directamente a las comunidades, ha fortalecido las capacidades de administración, ha generado alianzas entre ellos. Yo valoro mucho también que en algún momento planteé que ha eh, generado acciones conjuntas y colectivas, que es muy importante frente a la crisis que vivimos. Así no tenemos que enfrentar la crisis de forma personal, sino de forma colectiva. Y creo que aquí todas las iniciativas se han generado de forma colectiva. Entonces, creo que realmente ha sido una iniciativa muy importante, muy valorado. Hasta hoy, digamos, a partir tienen sus conexiones por los grupos que hemos creado, entre ellos comparten, muchos continúan con el trabajo, han logrado también apoyos de los municipios en algunos casos, pero también, digamos, es evidencia para exigir, son datos que se han generado, como este caso, por ejemplo. También hemos tenido otra iniciativa sobre la contaminación del petróleo en el agua, con la cual las comunidades siguen luchando para que no haya actividad petrolera en el territorio. Entonces, eh, los procesos siguen continuando, ¿no? Entonces, eso quería compartir. También ahí está nuestra página en la cual pueden consultar y ver realmente los logros de las otras iniciativas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Juan Carlos. I think we've heard some great content and some interesting reflections. And the one that maybe I'd just like to highlight from you is interesting to think about how much of the NLGF was really around evidence generation. This process wasn't going to be able to last forever. We would love these processes of the small granting to really be sort of integrated and mainstreamed into how finance flows. But the fact that much of what we were doing through NLGF was creating that evidence and unlocking opportunities at the local level. So I'm going to call upon a panel of individuals who are our fund managers representing the 7 different countries. I'm going to try and just pin everyone for now, and I'll just be asking a few questions and calling on individuals to respond to those particular questions. So whilst we heard 3 specific case studies from Indonesia, Kenya, and Bolivia, we also have our colleagues from Zambia, Tunisia, as well as Paraguay present here today. Unfortunately, our Bolivian colleagues had our Brazilian colleagues had another engagement, but we would still really love to hear from those countries in terms of their specific perspectives on implementation of the NLGF. So while I get to sort of spotlighting everyone, I will just start off by asking the question to the panel, who will include Ian Matimba from Zambia. It will include Emma Timmerman, who's representing Paraguay, as well as Bassam Suisi, representing the Arab Institute for Human Rights in Tunisia, as well as the fund managers who just presented. So maybe I can start by asking Bassam a question, and that would be, in your perspective and your context from Tunisia, what needs to change to enable models like the NLGF to really be successful?
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for inviting us to this meeting, and for all the colleagues for their great presentations. So I think to make models like the NLGF stronger and easier to expand, climate fund must become simpler and more accessible for local communities, small associations, women-led groups, GDA, and also for indigenous people, because many local actors have good ideas and strong community trust, but they face difficulties with complex administrative procedures and technical requirements. I think also that more support and training are also needed, as local organizations need help with project management, financial reporting, and communication. And the NLGF showed that regular coaching, mentoring, and field visits can greatly improve the quality and sustainability of local projects. I think also in another hand, that the governments and donors should also better recognize the importance of community-led climate action, because local initiatives should be integrated into national climate policies and supported through long-term funding, not only short-term projects like NLGF or other projects. Finally, I think that communication is so essential, because programs like, for example, our program in Tunisia, Eco Talks, radio show that helped give visibility to local initiatives and to showcase the different experiences of the NLGF projects led by the different partners in the Tunisia, and coordinated by our organization, the Arab Institute for Human Rights. And this shows also that shared success stories and inspire other communities can take action on climate change to another level, and can inspire also other persons and other organizations.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bassem. I think something that's quite interesting from the Tunisian context that people might be able to read in the report, but we were not able to present on today, is that it was very difficult to get funding to the local level, mainly based on government regulations around who can actually access funding. So much of the funding had to go to sort of smaller intermediary CSOs and then to local organizations on the ground. It would be interesting for you to also reflect in terms of that model and how that was successful, and what might need to shift within the Tunisian context to ensure that actually local organizations or individuals can receive the funding like that in the future.
Thank you for this question. As you mentioned, the situation in Tunisia is a little bit difficult with all the restrictions from the government regarding the foreign funds, and not all people are allowed to receive international funds from international donors. This is why the NLGF model was impactful in Tunisia, because it was community-based, flexible, and participatory fund. We tried through the management of the Arab Institute Institute for Human Rights to give the opportunity to not only the organizations and the formal organized organizations, but also to activists and community-based groupments. This is why we think that communities were able to identify their own needs through this project and to implement solutions adapted to their local realities instead of following a one-size-fits-all approach. Because some donors, unfortunately, they come from the north and they impose some things to the local organizations, and sometimes the solutions that are proposed by the foreign organizations are not adapted to the reality of the local organizations and their really needs. One of the main strengths of the program was its strong focus on women, also because women in Tunisia are key actors in water management, agriculture, and climate adaptation activities, which improved both community resilience and women's economic empowerment. And in this project, we gave a lot of spots to women-led organizations, and they prove that without these women, we can't have our food sovereignty in Tunisia. The model also was successful because financial support was combined with close technical and administrative accompaniment. So our financial department in the Arab Institute for Human Rights ensured a very one-to-one coaching for all the organizations who took the financial support, and also regular field visits, coaching, and continuous communication helped local organizations improve their capacities and successfully implement their projects. Another perhaps important factor was communication and storytelling, as mentioned in my previous intervention, because through our radio show, as you may know, the Arab Institute for Human Rights have a radio named Saida FM. So we used also this radio in order to amplify the voices of local communities and to amplify the voices of our partners who were part of the NLGF project. And this EcoTalks project was a space for them to share their good experiences. These activities increased the visibility of local initiatives and encouraged knowledge sharing and inspired other communities, because in Tunisia, for example, in many places we are facing the same challenges, but unfortunately we don't know how to deal with these challenges. So through our radio show, we try to share the good experiences and the good practices in order to spread these good practices in all the country. Also, I think that the projects created real impact on the ground, especially in water access, agroecology, and local resilience. And I think that to conclude, the NLGF demonstrated that even small grants can create significant environmental and social change when communities are directly involved and properly supported. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Bassem. I think you summarized all of your insights in the perfect last sentence of exactly that. That even with a small amount of funding, we can have these catalytic and multi-pronged effects if these processes are done right. So thank you so much. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Ian Matimba from Zambia to reflect on sort of the same question, Ian, if you are able to respond. So again, in your context of Zambia, what needs to change to enable models like the Next Level Grant Facility?
Thanks, Tiffany, and hi to everyone. Thanks for creating the platform for us to share experiences on the Next Level Grant Facility. So my name once again is Ian Matimba. I work for People's Process on Housing and Poverty in Zambia, a local NGO that was displacing funds under the NLGF framework. And in our case, I think the fund came at a time when Zambia had just experienced the worst drought in a decade, which saw over 6.6 million being affected and millions of hectares being damaged by climate change. So when this fund came, it was, I think, something that the community embraced because of the prevailing environmental challenges that they were experiencing at that level. But what we realized that in that case, even if there were emergencies and some resilient building projects that were happening, there was still a lot of top-down approach that was happening, where organizations were implementing instead of the communities taking charge of some of the resilient building challenges that happen in their communities. And from the process, what we learned that for the system to change, especially in Zambia, is that we need to recognize the grassroots power that they have more to do in terms of building their own resilience at community level. That means that we have to design our programs in a way that we target trainings and capacity building for them to be able to implement projects, not being recipients of solutions that are designed somewhere else. In as much as there was a lot of work that had been done in the 10 districts that we dispersed the resources by the VCA partners, we realized that in some areas where the VCA alliance were not so strong, even the application that came from there were not so good. So there is a lot of capacity building that also needs to be done by the organization to ensure that whatever that any grant that comes, the community actually has capacity to access those resources at that level. We've also ensured that we've also seen that I think the next level was unique in a way that it had the donor had a bit of appetite to take on some risks, which is unlike some of the funding that we have. We have currently in Zambia, out of the NLGF, we also have like a second phase of another granting cycle that we have out of that was born out of the NLGF, where we are giving about 50 grants for ecosystem restoration and resilience. But the model also, we still find difficulties in terms of who bears the risk of the communities sometimes not using the money how it's intended to. It's not like the communities are always scamming people out there, but the thing is that there are some groups that are very visible, but they have nothing in terms of the depth of the work that they are doing at community level. They are always there to get resources, but with little that they are doing at community level. What we have realized that to always combat that, it is to work with local structures, and also the VCA Alliance helped a lot to be able to scan through those groups and ensure that those that received money actually were grounded in those communities and were not fake. We also that the other thing that we realized under the VCA is that, of course, we had the overarching framework that was guiding how the funds were being disbursed. But in terms of defining what impact is, was sort of localized, where we then develop our own framework at that level. I think this is something that I would also encourage a lot of donors to look at whose impact matters. Is it the way they look at it at a global level or at a local level? For a local person, sometimes having a dam that keeps rainwater harvesting for them, I think throughout the year is more important than some of the impact that we want to achieve at a global level, at that level. So this program really enabled the communities to look at impact at a community level, what they think is impactful at that level. So that's something that I think also needs to change if such kind of funding frameworks has also to work. So the other question also is looking at what made the NLGF model impactful. So like what I said, it was the context that we had where we're coming from a drought, which was very impactful and had an impact on so many people, particularly on the issues of water. So in Zambia, if you look, most of the applications were around water and sanitation, because that was the sector that was heavily impacted by climate change and drought at that level. And over and above all, the process that was undertaken was very simple and for any community member to apply, where we even allowed people to even come and pitch even to our community, to our offices, their ideas. We help them to type it out and see if they can get resources at that level. And it was very flexible in the way that we're not looking at applications to disqualify people, but we're looking at how can we pick something significant out of their ideas and help them to enhance it to ensure that it fits our broader goal of the program at that level. But also, we have also embraced a lot of local structures, largely federation structures that were there. They helped us to spread the word in Zambia among all the fund managers, was one of the fund managers that was contracted lately. So it was like we're following while everyone had started already. But because of the existing federation that was there, it was easy for us to spread the word, and also having the federation producing some creative media to enable people to also apply for these resources. So over and above, I would say the fund was very flexible. That made it more accessible at that level. And then the VCA partners also did a lot in terms of the preparatory work, in terms of having prepared the communities. We realized that communities where the VCA was very strong, where they had conducted some community profilings, understanding the problems already, and also had co-created solutions already with the communities, it was easier, and the applications were actually higher as compared to the communities that didn't have social profiles in terms of what are the challenges that they're experiencing in their communities. So we realized that there was, I think, a good support that came from the VCA that actually enabled us to roll out the program seamlessly, despite that we had started lately at that level. So as we move on, I think if we are to design a program like this, it is also important to look at what are the existing structures, what are the other partners that you can now work together to be able to tap into these community groups that they're working with, and also build on what is existing, not really start afresh at that level. Thanks, Tiffany. I think that's what I can say for now.
Thanks so much, Ian. I might just ask you one specific follow-up question before I move on to a similar question to our other panelists. But I know you mentioned earlier that specifically there was a lot of capacity that was needed to be built. And I know in Zambia there was one sort of intervention that required, or quite a few interventions that required, for example, building of financial capacity. And in many ways that required at a very local level, for example, opening bank accounts. So I was wondering if you could reflect on maybe what was one of the sort of core capacities that you needed to support or build in order to make the NLGF successful in your context, acknowledging that it was a short funding, but perhaps that capacity will roll over to their ability to access funding in the future. So
All right, thanks, Steve. So one of the key capacity that was built was around even M&E, basic data collection, documentation of just pictures, maybe taking pictures, good pictures, and how to report at the lowest level in a simple way was something that we took time to capacitate them. But we realized that I think if we have to scale up some of these innovations, we have to further capacitate them to be able to look for resources independently after the program has finished. So there was a lot of sessions where we took them in terms of how do you respond to call for proposals as a community. So we actually entrenched it in our internal SDI systems of using social profiles, where you profile a community and you use that as evidence for you to be able to say there's a problem here that needs to be addressed at that level. And beyond that, we also try to federate them, which is bringing them on board to be part of our movement, our grassroots movement, which is Homeless and Poor People's Federation, where now they have access to some of these tools they use to be able to monitor, to be able to develop proposals as a network, not as individual and fragmented groups at that level. In terms of the financial management, it was basically, I think, a difficult thing because some of them, I think, it was a long process that was supposed to be taken, but I think about 30 or 40% of them ended up opening bank accounts. One of the challenges which was there was that women were really scared to be part and parcel of the signatories, and then so we had to enforce that to ensure that in every group that registers, it's not just men who are signatories to the account at that level. So they had literally most of the things that were required, but it was, I think, the patriarchal situation in most of the districts, especially the rural one, where women were scared to be in front of managing the resources and stuff. But this is something that we took time and went back and forth. I think we even had some of the groups sort of threatening them to writing to them to disqualify them, just because it was very difficult for them to acknowledge that women are the ones who be the signatories for the funds at the bank. Yeah, I hope I have responded comprehensively to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ian. I think that's a really, really interesting reflection. And also to acknowledge that maybe as Juan Carlos said, much of the work that was done through the NLGF was really, really trying to test and understand some of these barriers and boundaries. And in many ways, like your example now, we were able to overcome maybe some of those barriers, but also just to shed some light and some evidence around how to address or what barriers to look out for in terms of these funding landscapes. So I'm going to move on to Emma Timmerman, who is representing Paraguay. We unfortunately don't have the fund manager from Cotohupi, so I will ask Emma a similar question of what needs to change to enable models like the NLGF, and sort of what made the NLGF also impactful in the context of Paraguay.
Thanks, Tiff, and nice to see you. Nice to see you, several of our colleagues as well, and thanks for all the people who have been presenting their case studies. It's always very interesting to hear more in depth some details. I will try not to repeat too many things, because I think a lot of issues or a lot of challenges are similar over the different landscapes, over the different countries. So maybe I will just dive into some more particular issues. So I think that the change really should be focused on the setup of the kind of funding, in the sense that in the case of Paraguay, we've seen that it's quite challenging, quite difficult actually to really get to reach the grassroots level. So we have a quite good collaboration, quite a good reach with civil society groups in general. But if we go beyond that, there are really a lot of barriers. And I think there it's interesting to stand still a bit or to analyze, right? So there are a lot of communities in Paraguay that live in very remote areas. So we're talking about communities that are living isolated for periods of time during the year, or for almost the whole time. So it also depends on rains, and during the rainy seasons where roads are not usable, for instance. So they're really quite cut off for longer periods, mostly during the year. So that's already a very important obstacle. And also there are a lot of communities that don't have internet access. So everything that we post online is already a barrier. So I also heard Bassem sharing about the use of local radio stations. And that's something that we found out that in Paraguay, it's also something that works quite a lot. So a lot of people really use local radio on an almost daily basis for their source of information. Another issue is the informal economy. I think a lot of the countries here present will have similar challenges, let's say. So a lot of communities don't have access to banking services, for instance. So if we work with models that where the donor or the funding requires certain financial measurements, then it's already difficult. So there are a lot of people, organizations, community that don't have access to banking services, to banking accounts, etc. So it's also another way of thinking how to get money literally to those places, right? So what was interesting is finding out ways to reduce also these technical barriers. So we found out that we had an online form that people could fill out to ask for to make a request to the NLGF. But actually, for a lot of people or a lot of communities, that's already too much of a step. You know, the internet access as such, but also just filling out a form. Like, although it was very minimal, but structuring a very small project is also difficult. So in practice, WhatsApp was used a lot. So people actually, the fund manager had a telephone line that was used only for NLGF, and a lot of people actually sent voice notes. And most of the communication was with voice notes. Also because there's not always that telephone access. So people, when they have signal, they send a voice message. You know, so often it was quite a period of going back and forth of understanding what the needs actually were locally and how the fund manager could intervene in an effective way. So yeah, and as a sum up, I think information or access to information is already really important, and thinking about other ways. Launching something on a website might not be that efficient. So local radio, meetings, in-person meetings where people can actually explain and where people can ask questions was also very useful. And then use of WhatsApp was also very important in our case. I think I can leave it there.
Great, thanks, Emma. I'm going to then open the floor to our other fund managers who presented case studies. We already heard a lot of your sort of reflections and context, but I wanted to check Neural, Wakesho, and Juan Carlos if there was anything else you would like to add in terms of what needs to change to enable models like the NLGF. So if you can just put your hand up if you would like to respond. And then I will ask a question that has been posed in the chat and see also which fund managers would like to respond to that. So just opening it up to Wakesho, Nurul, and Juan Carlos, if anyone would like to respond, firstly.
Sí, puedo.
Sure, go
Sí,
ahead, Juan Carlos.
sí, creo que es una pregunta muy interesante que creo que hay que hacernos, es decir, ¿qué ha cambiado? Yo creo que en el proceso, efectivamente, en muchos casos, digamos, ha cambiado también en la forma de cómo llegar a las comunidades. En nuestro caso, efectivamente también hemos tenido, porque, perdón, tenemos que partir del principio de acceso, digamos, que todos puedan tener acceso en las mismas condiciones para presentarse a estas convocatorias que hemos sacado, ¿no? ¿Y cómo se llega a las comunidades? Efectivamente, no todos tienen acceso a Internet. Entonces, hemos usado medios, por ejemplo, como la radio. Hemos usado también enviar las convocatorias a sus eventos orgánicos, ¿no? Entonces, creo que ese hecho de cómo se llega también es un cambio que estamos generando de transparencia en nuestro accionar para que todos y todas puedan tener oportunidad de presentar su propuesta a las convocatorias, ¿no? Un segundo elemento que me parece importante también es cómo hacemos la toma de decisión. Entonces ahí, en la toma de decisión, creo que es importante también nosotros hemos conformado una comisión que pueda calificar para que no haya ningún sesgo y sea totalmente transparente eh, ya en la decisión, pero también la transparencia en el manejo, ¿no? Porque hay un mito, creo que siempre se habla, que los pueblos indígenas, las comunidades, pueden tener dificultades en manejar fondos. Y eso no es verdad, eso creo que también hay que decirlo. si bien, digamos, ellos tienen estructuras orgánicas que manejan recursos, no serán recursos grandes, ¿no? Manejan recursos del aporte de los comunarios cotidianamente, si todos los días están manejando fondos y están rindiendo en sus eventos orgánicos. Y lo mismo han hecho con esto, con este apoyo que hemos hecho. Entonces, hay que desmitificar esa consigna, digamos, o ese mito que dice que las comunidades no pueden manejar fondos, ¿no? Efectivamente, requieren mayores capacidades que se han dado y eso también hemos generado conjuntamente, adecuado también a la situación. Pero yo diría, realmente las comunidades hay un control de todos y hay una transparencia clarísima, digamos, ¿no? Entonces, eso ahí creo, esto también hay que defenderlo en diferentes espacios, ¿no? Y finalmente, creo que es importante, digamos, los cambios que se van generando, que las propias comunidades, que en muchos casos, digamos, tienen escolaridad de 2, 3 años, apenas pueden también escribir, eh, puedan también, tienen ideas importantes y ahí el rol de los jóvenes, de sus hijos o de los niños, por ejemplo, de la escuela, con los que han hecho hacer el proyecto, escribir a mano o hacer escribir en computadora y mandar y presentarse. Creo que es importante, no es una limitación el no saber escribir. Creo que el proyecto está en el que tiene claras las cosas, las necesidades, cómo quieres resolver de forma conjunta y siempre habrá alguien que se los pueda escribir para mandar, ¿no? Entonces creo que también eh, eso también cambia, ¿no? Porque no es que esto está diseñado para profesionales o para los que realmente pueden, sino creo que está diseñado para el que quiera y tiene idea y pueda generar cambios. Eso de mi parte, digamos, creo que son acciones muy, muy profundas, muy de adentro que han generado. Bueno, lo triste es que no ha podido continuar porque ha generado también mucha expectativa. Nosotros seguimos recibiendo llamadas, si va a haber otra convocatoria, cuándo va a salir, si nos van, ¿no? Entonces, esto es, digamos, también lo que se ha generado y hay, digamos, ojalá desde otros fondos también puedan tener esta posibilidad de llegar directamente a las comunidades, ¿no? Gracias.
Thank you, Jean Carlos. Tabitha?
I just had maybe one small reflection around the issue of accompaniment. And I know we are talking about capacity strengthening and things like those. I just wanted to mention that in the SDI family, I think there's something that we really believe in. And I think it's something that should really be considered in funding mechanisms such as NLGF. I think creating a platform for peer-to-peer learning and exchanges is really great for the community. And I think seeing firsthand what can be done more efficiently, more effectively, what can save resources, I think is really quite important in such kind of mechanism. And I think it's a really important thing to incorporate in any funding mechanism that is taking the NLGF form. And thankfully for NLGF, we had the bigger program, the VCA program. So I think some of those elements were able to be supported through the bigger VCA program, as much as that could not maybe go straight into the administrative elements of NLGF. I think maybe another I think this has been mentioned, but maybe just to really take it home is that some of these groups really need someone to trust them for other people to be able to fund them. So we have to be those people that we trust the group so that other funders, other donors are able to trust these groups. And I think this is particularly interesting for the Kenyan context because out of just giving the grant, the NLGF grant to the group, for the first-time grantees especially, that just unlocked so many other opportunities for funding for some of these groups. And opportunities in terms even monetary opportunities, non-monetary, maybe training opportunities, and it really does create a foundation. So we have to be push for all, if not most funders, to take that, and even in the mainstream traditional ways of, we should always be pushing for small, not even small, we should always push for a percentage that goes to this kind of groups, and that will allow taking that first step towards this kind of groups. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Wakesho. I think that's an important and very heartfelt point to raise, and maybe it also responds to what Juan Carlos was saying, that I think we would love to be living in a circumstance where many of these groups are already trusted, are already receiving funding, but they are not. So processes like the NLGF at least create and support some legitimacy, and hopefully in the future, we don't need as many fund managers or intermediary organizations, but the right ones that are bringing together a lot of the funds and the capacity at the local level, so that in the future they can access those funding window opportunities more directly. I think that's where we really are trying to get to. I'm just going to ask Bassem if you could respond to the question that's in the chat. I see that Nurul, you've already responded. So if you could just give us a quick response to that, because we are going to close off in about 5 minutes. But I think that you from Tunisia will have also an interesting perspective on Zelia's question around experiencing issues with government wanting to keep record of funding received for civil society organizations. I see that we have some perspective from Indonesia, but it would be great, I think, to give Zelia that perspective from Tunisia. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. So in Tunisia, we have some barriers in front of the civil society organizations because, for example, individuals can't receive money from international organizations or either national donors. So if you don't have a patent and you don't have an official registration, you can't receive money. This was one of the challenges we faced in NLGF project, as the DNA of the project is that we can give funds to individuals and to grassroots organizations. So after a long reflection with our colleagues from the financial department, and Sane is present today with us in this meeting, our colleague from the financial team, we found a solution that the Arab Institute for Human Rights can give support through the NLGF project to individuals, but with the condition that the Arab Institute for Human Rights is the part who will purchase the needed stuff for the individuals or the non-registered movements. So we made some meetings with the persons, of course, after all the selection process, the individuals who were selected to get benefits of the NLGF funds were invited to meetings in order to know their needs, and after that the Arab Institute for Human Rights launched all the procurement needed procedure in order to purchase all the needed materials on behalf of these persons, and this was a very appreciated method. This method was appreciated by the individuals and also by the grassroots movements, as many of them was their first experience in receiving foreign grants from organizations. And also for the civil society organizations, we were so attentive when we gave them the grants, because we have our internal procedure and our internal audit procedure, and we tried also to be as more as we can transparent in order to be in good terms with the government and in good terms with the donors. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Bassem. Yeah, I think to some extent, everyone faces similar challenges at different degrees. I know that Brazil also has a slightly more regulated environment, but also Zelia, you're welcome to email us and ask any specific questions, or we could share some more information from specific country context. So thank you so much. Great. So I'm going to just say thank you to our panelists for your responses, and I think giving us a little bit more depth and insight into your experiences and also your recommendations about what should shift and what really needs to change and what is very important at the local level. I think in many ways we through this learning report and policy brief have tried to capture much of those sort of nuances. But I think hearing from each individual really grounds what the NLGF did and how it should really be taken forward. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Thandiwe just to give a few closing remarks, and then I'll just do a sort of final closing of the webinar. So Thandiwe, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Tiff. I just want to say thank you so much to Tiff and Charlotte and everyone at SSN behind the scenes that have worked very hard to put this together. It's really quite amazing just how much has been achieved by all the alliance partners in this short space of time. So thank you so much. And of course, I would like to acknowledge all the fund managers, all the speakers today, the panelists and all those that presented. Thank you very much for all the work and the insightful presentations that you made today. I think from what we've heard from all of you in the representing the 7 implementing countries, I think what you have indicated today attests to what VCA had initially intended to do. So I think we should all be proud of ourselves of what we have achieved collectively and together. We were able to transfer a budget. We were able to transfer a budget, responsibility and accountability to the local partners, to the local communities, and we were able to manage more than 3 million euros and more than 500 projects have been implemented specifically on resilience and cushioning climate disasters. I think that itself is a key milestone that each one of us around this table and our colleagues back at home should really be proud of. This actually signifies the value of the alliance, and having nested the NLGF within the VCA program helped us to achieve more than we had actually intended to achieve. And I think as an alliance, we were able to enhance a movement, moving away from personal focus to collective actions, and also to networks and not just fragmented groups. And I think these are all lessons that can actually be imparted to others, and to see how best initiatives such as NLGF can actually be upscaled or maybe scaled to more countries. And I think, as other colleagues have already said, I think we've been able to generate that evidence that shows that local groups can actually be trusted. And I think, as somebody said here, we actually need to demonstrate that the way of the communities does work. Because in the first instance, we created the NLGF, noting that the traditional and the traditional funding mechanisms are not working in the favor of the smaller groups. And we have generated that evidence. We know that communities have been accountable. They can be trusted with sums of money. They have their own ecosystem. They have their own traditional ways of how to manage those systems. So if these systems can actually be articulated by all of us in broader groups and advocate for alternative ways of doing things, I think we can actually achieve more than we have already done. Indeed, there are still struggles. There are certain things that we cannot control. There is no access to some communities that we would hope to see being embedded in the work that we are already doing. Those are things that are over and beyond our control. Nevertheless, what can we, from these learning opportunities, from these learnings that we've had today, how can we make sure that more people can trust the communities, the the constituencies and the movements that we've been working with over the last 5 years. So with that, I leave you with that challenge, but also just to say thank you so much, everyone. So much work has been done. We should all be proud of ourselves. And I think we should really hold our heads high. And I'm really inspired and so very thankful to countries like Zambia and many others also that did not have an opportunity maybe to flag up the fact that you've already been able to secure more opportunities as a result of the NLGF. So not all is lost. We know that more opportunities will be coming to all the countries. Let's just keep the fire burning. Let's keep communicating via our VCA WhatsApp group. For those that are not in and you are willing to be part of that, please communicate with Chief and also with Charlotte, so that we can communicate and continue sharing opportunities that are coming. Let's keep NLGF live. So thank you so much, everyone. And I wish you all the best in whatever you are doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Thandiwe, for those inspiring and uplifting, I think, closing remarks. I think there was a question about specifically what's next, and unfortunately, the Next Level Grant Facility as itself and the Voices for Just Climate Action program have come to a close, but the fire is still burning, and we are hoping that some of this evidence and the opportunities that were created will be able to leverage going into the future. We are looking at how we can really shift this idea of local fund managers and global south intermediaries into a sort of key position around how financing flows to the local level. I know South North is focusing on this through other programs like the Generating Ambition for Locally Led Adaptation and others, but hopefully we can package this pilot, acknowledging that there were many lessons learned. Not everything was perfect, but we've shown and we've sort of proven that the NLGF does indeed work and is more impactful than just giving funds at the local level. There's a ripple effect in terms of how those benefits and opportunities really have created more benefits and opportunities and funding for local groups. So just with that, and 1 minute to go, I'm going to mirror Thandiwe's appreciation for the colleagues in the Voices for Just Climate Action program, in particular the fund managers who've been very engaged and pivotal to this process, not only in implementing the funding, but also in drawing a lot of the lessons together that allowed us to develop this report. It was a significant amount of additional work to really gather the data that allows us to see the full picture. So thank you. It's been a really amazing journey for us to work together, and we appreciate the pivotal role that you have played. And thank you to also all the other colleagues on the line who have joined us to listen in about the Next Level Grant Facility. As I said, you are welcome to read our 2 publications. There's a learning report as well as a policy brief, and you're welcome to let us know if you want to connect on similar initiatives. And you can email us, and you can find that email address in the bottom of the report. We will share the recordings and also just follow up with links to those. But thank you, everyone. And as always, thank you to our interpretation team. And lastly, also to our 2 consultants, again, Olison Kanmi and Daniel, for helping us to put this work together. So all the best. I hope you have a good afternoon, evening, morning, rest of the day.